Yeah. Hey, everybody. This is Lloyd Green, Hall of Famer. But you'll see, look here, that if you own that show bud with the pad on the back of the neck, this is the guy. He's our cornerstone, in my opinion. He is mine.
Thank
and
you,
I'm so honored that you decided to do this with us, and what a beautiful song. You got to tell me about that. I mean,
well, thank you very much. First, everything you said, let me just put a little mark by it and say I feel the same way. This is the ultimate honor for me to do this with you. I know this is going to be a wonderful thing. We're going to give some information that is probably not possible outside of a few of us who are around and who've had a long experience in the studio, like yourself and myself. This song is a song called Venus Moon. I wrote it about a year and a half ago. It was a very emotional experience. This is what inspired me to write it, and I have no idea where the idea came from, but I incorporated a lot of this new stuff that I've been working on into this song, and it just kind of wrote itself. I mean, I think it's a beautiful melody. It's difficult. It's like you visualize it like being in a turbulent stream of water, and it starts in the turbulence, and the rapids. And if you get through the rapids, then it gets into smooth water. But it's tough getting into the first 3 or 4 chords, which are major sevenths and with varying positions. And and it's not the it's a little unorthodox for the way steel players normally approach these things, but it can be slowed down and played.
It will.
And in fact, there has been documents that's written it out already on the song by a guy in Europe.
Oh, great, great.
So it's been.
So that's a good thing to come.
Yeah, but it's just one of those things that I've been experimenting with, and it was a wonderful way to put a lot of the ideas together into a focused song.
Well, to me, it's like watching a master violinist, play. It's like it has all these the rises, emotional thing, and then it's like it's not as if everything you're playing isn't so complicated. I mean, you don't realize it until you sit down and try to make all this, and then but he's. If you'll notice that you got to watch this video over, just that much of it. But you'll watch Lloyd; he's muting, and you taught me this, and when I was 16, these are just Lloyd Green-isms, of the way the instrument gets played. But because you had so many strings ringing in vibrato, to get the emotion you wanted, you had to touch strings with your fingers to just keep them from. Because watch what happens. And the wrong note can creep in, but just...
Well, and it's even more than that. It has to do with the sevenths and the ninths in the chord that you want muted out if they don't belong. Now, for instance, the end of this song is where you see me do a major mute, where I do a arpeggio. And I wanted that seventh string out after a few beats, and you still hear it in your head, but it's not there, and the dissonance goes away, but it's still... It creates an illusion.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Now I didn't do it on the record. I let Russ Paul talk me into keeping it there, and I regret not muting that, because when I play it live, I do mute that string after about 3 or 4 beats to let it sink into the brain as part of the fullness of the chord, and then you get rid of that 7th string, and it becomes a whole different chord.
Yeah.
It becomes just a straight tonic chord.
Well, I'm thinking of Mozart right now. Watching films on him where he had composed things, and it would be, everything's beautiful. He probably never wrote anything bad, but he'd go, no, that's wrong. That one note's wrong there. And it's because he had a visualization and he knew what he wanted to deliver, and that's what you're doing. So you're applying all kinds of compositional ideas as well, but that's when you're learning to play a steel guitar, no one tells you, hey, you're using your picks and I know how to get a clean string. Well, okay, but what about if a note creeps in you don't want? Well, that's how it's done.
Well, and there's another one, probably one I showed you early on in your career, was that.
Yes.
You go from the 5 to the 1 or 1 suspension, but you got to get rid of that 9th string and to make the chord blossom. And how do you do that? I mean, if you let it ring, here's what happens. Then you got a really dissonant sound. But then I determined, well, why can't I learn to mute that without hitting the other string? Sometimes I don't hit it. And you got a full. So you got you're avoiding an interval in between.
Yeah.
You've eliminated an interval and gone from the top interval to the 3rd and 4th intervals, and the middle one's missing, and it gives a different audio aspect to it and to the listener's ear. And it just, to me, it sounds pretty. I like it.
Oh man, it sounds great. And there's so many things. I mean, this interview would take months because there's decades of information that you have to share with the world. I just want to say this about Lloyd. As a person, if you met Lloyd, as I did as a kid, or if you met him last week, and if he's playing at a guitar and you had a question, he's this forthcoming. He said, well, it's just this, and it's and you've just been great about sharing You know, your knowledge and you know, your thoughts about how music is played and all that. And I think that's great. And
it should be shared. You know,
yeah, no.
It's part of the universal knowledge. You know, mathematics are, and music is, art. They're all part of some sort of universal intelligence that I think people, you know, if you are creative, you tap into this source.
Yeah.
A lot of these things seem to be already written, frankly, in a real sense, and you don't sell them or you don't keep them secret. I mean, that would dilute the whole value of the knowledge. I mean, they are to be shared.
Yeah.
And I feel the need to share, and you do too.
Yeah.
I know. And
you have to pay it forward, as they say.
pay it forward, yes.
So many things I want to tell the class, because there are a lot of new steel players here, and they play, and they're monster musicians on other instruments, and so I want to tell you a little bit about Lloyd. Throughout the years, you know, he's been one of the leading session players since the '60s. What year was it? '64 that or '63?
I started in 1964. I really wanted to start earlier.
Yeah.
I came to Nashville when I was 19. I left college and just on a whim, I came to Nashville, gave up a scholarship, and my parents thought I was insane. You know, what are you doing? And I got a job with Fair and Young the first day I was here, and that became a 1.5-year educational experience in itself. Only years later, did I start recording with it. But anyway, 3 months after I was here, I cut my first session with George Jones, a song called "Too Much Water Under the Bridge." Didn't go #1, went #7, but I played a little cool solo, and Hank Garland was playing the guitar, man.
Oh.
And I thought, to myself, this is where I belong. This is what I'm designed to do. Cut records. I'm going to do this the rest of my life. Well, sure enough, I got my next recording session, Paul. 7 years later. It was a long, hard hill to climb.
Wow.
And so consequently, my career started actually in 1964. And it actually started in CSAC. I was hired as Roy Drusky's assistant. He opened the very first, Roy Drusky was a singer on Mercury Records, and he had some in fact, I cut a #1 record with him and Priscilla Mitchell.
Which song was that?
Called Mr. and Mrs. Peters.
Oh, yeah.
A #1 record in 1964 or 5, early 64, I think. And they didn't. Nobody thought I was going to get into sessions. I mean, that wasn't why they hired me. I had an office right on Music Row and next to Columbia Records on 16th Avenue, but I had it was a kind of a part-time job, so they gave me liberty to do sessions if I got any sessions. Not knowing what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And the first week I did an album at RCA and two demos, man, and I was off and running. I never slowed down. And after 3.5 years, I had to resign because I never was in the office anymore.
Oh, yeah. I know why, because if you guys go back and was some of the first records you cut on Warner Mac and
No, I did a lot of sessions before Warner Mac, which was done in 1965. I'd really started doing a great amount of work up to that record from Easter, after Easter in 1964 when I started at CSAC to I guess early in 1965, a year later, when I cut the bridge washed out with Warner Mac, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
I had started doing a lot of sessions, but I wasn't doing the big stuff. Well, I mean, Kelso Hurster was using me on United Artists Records, and I cut "Girl on the Billboard" with Dale Reeves. But my contribution was a backward slant on "Girl on the Billboard" to cover up a profanity, and it was just with a lot of distortion on the guitar and reverb wide open. It was just a.
Oh, that was the beep.
But I was on a #1 record. It was my second #1 record, but. Then Warner Mac heard this style I'd been working on the Screen Gems demo. He was looking for songs, and he asked Tony Moon, the guy who was running Screen Gems music, he said, "I'm not interested in that song, but who is that steel player?" He said, "I got a song I've written that style's perfect for." And he gave him my name and number, and he called me. He said, "I've written this song. You've already got the style for it." He said, so he came over to my house. And we worked it up exactly what we were going to play, what I was going to play on the record, if Owen Bradley would use me.
Yeah.
That became another challenge, but but he did finally relent and let me play on the session, and it quickly became a #1 record, and it was a new style.
Yeah, it was.
And the other two steel players who were recording, I mean, there were 4 of us actually. There was Pete Drake, Weldon Myrick, Hal Rugg, and myself. Well, Hal Rugg and Weldon Myrick, they took that style and went running with it too. And within about 2 years, we had worn the style out, and it became something of the past. But it was on a lot of records during that couple of years. But it was a kind of a muted style, and I was muting with this part of my hand, the palm, and it was like.
Oh yeah.
But a little better than that on the record, you know, of course. Then, but that was the style. It involved the second and third pedal.
Yeah.
And nobody had been doing that.
No.
I mean, occasionally they had. Jimmy Day had played on a song with Dave Rich on RCA Records called "It Didn't Work Out, Did It?" And I got the germ of the idea from that, what he played, because he didn't pursue it, but he played that. Anyway, he used it just for that, from the A chord to the G chord, from the 5 to the 7 chord and 7 flat chord, and that stuck in my memory. He did that in like late 50s or either the early 60s, but and I just took that germ of that idea and made that into this style.
Yeah.
And
but you completed the style, because there's so much more to it.
Well, there was so much more, but that was the nucleus. I mean, I said, there's a style right there. I mean, I know that. Yeah.
You had a knack for doing that, I got to tell you, because there's so many things that I remember when I started out playing, okay, in Detroit, you know, I was isolated, and so the radio was the only thing I had, plus a few vinyl records, until one of you guys came through, and then I got to ask 1,000 questions. But the thing that I noticed, like, okay, a lot of guys were doing this kind of stuff, you know, where as you move your bar, the string stays the same, but you know, it may be only one lick, you know, and I didn't see the importance, you know, so I'm copying, you know, all the guys, and then, but when you're the first record I bought of yours was with Motel Time, and then I started buying anything I could find with your name on it, and it was like, and the thing that I started noticing within your playing was like, pedals weren't raises, they weren't lowers to you. It's like you had mastered moving. If a string raised, that meant that every other string could lower. And I don't know how you define that thing, but that's.
Well, I was always thinking of harmonies going different directions than the traditional direction, moving up with the melody. I felt like they could go here, they could go there. I looked at it like a mathematical equation, and or a geometric construction. Yeah. And it gave all kind of different visuals of the mathematical design, and I think I thought of it in those terms because I didn't really. I could just hear these things in my head, and I didn't purposely try to do them. They just felt instinctively correct when I did them, and I only did them in relation to the songs. I didn't sit around trying to come up with licks by myself at home. I didn't, because I found when I practiced at home, I found if I concentrated or focused on playing music, then I started throwing all these ideas away because I never ran out of ideas. So I would just practice skills to keep my skills as sharp as I could. I mean, when you're recording all the time, as you know, you don't have a lot of time to spend practicing at home, but and they can alter a little bit. But I just always played off of the melody. There were a whole bunch of studio nuances that are involved in recording. At least it was in that era when the steel guitar was expected to come up with ideas, and where the steel guitar was going to be featured. on a lot of records. And I listened to first the melody, the song, you know, and the lyrics. And then I'm taking in the ambiance of the room. What's the conversations? I'm processing all this stuff.
Yes.
And then you got to factor in the producer's desires, the singer, the way the singer's phrasing. And there's so many multifacets involved in coming up with an idea. I mean, and they just, but they were all like automatic processes. And I'd get these ideas based on all that. And I didn't ever want to sound, I mean, I never tried to purposely sound different with a different singer, but I didn't sound the same with from Paycheck to Charlie Pride or from Charlie Pride to Gene Watson, perhaps Mel Street or...
Well, even the stuff you did with Millsap was totally a
Millsap,
departure
yes.
from other things. So you just kept on.
Yeah, it was always the moment, you know.
Yeah.
You just, but I knew the instrument. I had learned the instrument which gets back to the fundamentals, which we need. I know that's what we need to discuss with you. And I didn't have to think about what these things were doing. I just know where they're at.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned them at some point and got them locked into my memory banks where I don't think of the instrument as I mean, I just think of it in musical notes and in combinations. I'm not thinking of pushing pedals or knee levers or strings going up or down. I hear them doing that, but I don't. If you consciously think of that, then it becomes mechanical.
Oh yeah.
And the trick to playing music, because there's several levels. You know, you learn to play steel guitar, pedal steel guitar, by learning a little theory, hopefully, and then you learn to play the instrument and apply some of the theory. Then you learn to play music, hopefully, with those two levels of knowledge, and then you got another area. I mean, if you're going to have any originality, then where's the creative area? And that's the part that nobody can really explain. I don't know where it comes from either, and some people are able to tap into it, some aren't. But that's the level above music. But you can't get into that arena, I think, without having all the fundamentals of learning theory and learning to play the instrument and learning to play music. And then comes the other part when you've got all that locked in and you're just you're free. You're a free spirit. You know, you're just waiting for the inspiration. Where's it at?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, that whole musicality thing. I mean, I think that's everybody's goal, you know, when they think about playing an instrument. But, you know, I know with the questions that I've already received, that's what everybody wants to know. How do you improvise? How do you? It's like they've had, you know, everybody out there, and tablature serves its purpose, but tablature is just, it's paint by the numbers, and it's like it doesn't really take you anywhere until you really commit to memory. And the skills that I'm assuming you're talking about are the same ones I've been trying to work on all my life.
No, you've mastered them too.
Well, but it's those things, and I think that they get, when I say everybody, when they look at this instrument, they get confused. They think like there's going to be some magical lesson that takes them beyond learning how to do the vibrato, the volume pedal, and all those things, and memory. It's the ultimate thing is you have to memorize this stuff to where you don't have to think. And you said it right there, and I had to hold back from interrupting you because it's like that's the key. It's Jerry Douglas said about instruction. He said that stuff's hard to teach. He said because I forgot all that stuff. I don't think it's all beyond. It's what I did at first and continue to do, but I don't think about how you put it together. But it's like a wave.
And I think. When people ask me to dissect an idea I've played that is original, then I find it's complicated for me to do it because then it becomes a different creature. Yeah. It becomes some sort of mechanical process, and when I'm playing it, it's not a mechanical process. It's a woven together fabric and tapestry of an idea, and I think of it. Well, I mean, I think of it in many forms, but it's painting. You know, it's painting with an instrument rather than a brush and a canvas, you don't remember all this stuff that you played. But I mean, I remember if I need to remember, but but I don't go back and revisit those places because they were just that moments that are frozen in time. That, Van Gogh didn't go back and paint the same picture each time. Leonardo didn't paint the Mona Lisa but one time.
Yeah.
And Gainsborough didn't paint Blue Boy but one time. I mean, you just move on to the next step. But I understand when you're teaching, that's way beyond the beginner's level. But that's the aspiration.
Yeah.
And when I was a young player, frankly, I didn't think of all these things either. You know, I was trying to learn the instrument and understand it. And I kind of evolved along with pedals. I was playing before pedals and professionally, and when Bud Isaacs cut slowly, I was 15 years old, and and that stopped everybody in their tracks if that was playing at that moment. And most of us knew we had to have whatever was happening on that record. And it took me about 2 hours to figure out what he was doing. And I had my own little homemade pedal built, and I found when I got to Nashville, everybody else that I ran into had been playing all over the country, had done the same thing, different variations of that little homemade rudimentary pedal to get that E to A change that Bud Isaacs did.
The thing that I'm envious, because I got in on the tail end. I remember when we ordered our first, you sent off for a Showbud brochure and everything, and I remember it said double 8s, double 9s, you know, and it's hard for this time period to think that steel's, but it was all evolving, and it was such a time. So Lloyd, you know, your whole experience was right there from the ground floor. I mean, in essence, you had to, in many ways, had to figure out things, you know, like the E to F change. You know, like for things you wanted to play, it wasn't on the guitar.
Well, let me go back even further.
Okay.
I couldn't afford a guitar. After I played with Fair and Young for a year and a half, and the times got worse. I mean, for my wife, Dot, and me, and we had 2 children. So it was a long process of starving. She kept us from starving, literally, and we kept coming back to Nashville. I couldn't give up. She didn't want me to give up. And we felt like there was going to be that little break eventually that people would listen to me, because I felt like I had the ideas, but nobody would listen. And I remember, and I only had a steel guitar that shot. Jackson was kind enough to take a Rickenbacker double neck, which was made of plywood, basically, and put 2 pedals on it so I could have the E to A change. That's all I had. No knee levers. And that's when Buddy Emmons and Jimmy Day and Walter Haynes and Sonny Burnett and all the players in Nashville had already gone way beyond. They had a floor full of pedals and maybe 1 or 2 knee levers, I guess. And I had all these ideas. I couldn't play them. I didn't have anything to play them on. And then one night backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, Sonny Burnett came in, all excited. He said, "Well, guys, we might as well fold it up." He said, Buddy and Jimmy have decided that everything's been played on the E nice, so they're going to start focusing on the C6 neck. And everybody, wow, okay. Except me. I didn't say a word. I'm thinking, great. That's great, because I got all this music they haven't played yet. I can hear it, but I don't have anything to play it on. So good. I hope they just leave it. Yeah. So I'll have and literally 9 months before I started recording, I did not have a guitar. Shot Jackson called me with a Bigsby double neck, which had a plaque on the cover in the front. It had been made for Johnny Seibert originally, for Carl Smith's steel player. And Webb Pierce had bought the guitar for Sonny Burnett, but he couldn't have that name show him because Carl Smith and it was competitive. So I didn't even know. I knew it was a Bigsby. I didn't know what name was under there because it had a plaque shot. I mean, a front board that Shot had put on there real deftly and painted. So, and he said, if you'll take this thing and make the notes $22 a month for 3 years, I'll give it to you. He said, there's a guy I made it for, and he got thrown in jail after he got made 1 note. I co-signed on it. He was in Florida. Sheriff sent it back to me. I said, wow, yes, of course. He said, if you have any trouble making any notes, you call me and I'll make those notes. I want it paid for. So this was 9 months before I got into recording sessions. I had a guitar with 6 floor pedals and 2 knee levers, and I felt like I had gone from an antique Model A to a Mercedes.
Yeah.
I mean, and then I could play all these ideas I had, at least part of them,
Yeah.
and that's what I started with. I mean, 9 months later, I started recording, and I never had, so I wasn't contaminated by the past, except what I wanted to be contaminated by. When I say contaminated, I mean that in the most positive fashion, because Jimmy Day and Buddy Emmons contributed. They built the foundation of the modern pedal steel guitar after Buzz Isaacs had cut slowly. They were the first 2 really great steel players to come to Nashville, and arguably maybe still are. I don't know, but they were certainly far ahead of their time. And but I, like you know, at some point you realize, well, wait a minute, they're already a Buddy Emmons and there's already a Jimmy Day, and I don't want to be those guys. I want to be Lloyd Green, and you wanted to be Paul Franklin. And I think all creative players arrive at that. I think all players probably do at some point. They don't want to be known as somebody else.
Yeah, you know, you want to be you find your own identity, sure, but
so I had just this mind full of ideas that were just bursting to come out, you know, and I had nothing to play them on until that 9 months before. So it might be good because nobody would listen. I can tell you about the Bridge Washed Out. After we had cut the record, I'm sitting backstage one night at the Opry in the dressing room at the Ryman, and in the dressing room was Buddy Emmons holding court, and Jimmy Day, Walter Haynes, and a number of other players, I'm sure. And I was sitting there because Farron Young was fixing to do the spot pretty soon. I was going to play with him. And that may not be right because Ben Keith was with him. It might have been Margie Bowes. I was only working with about 3 or 4 artists when I started doing sessions. But anyway, we were fixing to do the spot, so I'm sitting tuning my steel, and I started playing that Bridge Washed Out style just to see if there was going to be any reaction. And I just went, you know. And there was not even a head turned, not a single head turned and said, "What is that?"
yeah,
Until the record came out. And I knew, you know, that gave me a real insight into the psychology of music and of people, that when you become known, then suddenly your ideas are valuable, or your thoughts are valuable. But till you can get that first door open, then you're just another non-entity in a sense. And nobody paid attention, yet I gave them this whole new idea that was going to be on this record that everybody paid attention to when it came out.
Yeah.
And how'd you do that? You know, Weldon, I walked into Showbud one day after the Bridge Washed Out was our #1 record. It was really hot at that time. And when Showbud was on Nesbitt Lane in Madison, in a little tin building by the railroad tracks next to Weno Radio, which was the major country station in Nashville besides WSM in 1965, and I heard music playing in the back of the Showbud factory there, and I walked back there, and they were playing over and over that solo on the Bridge Washed Out, and there was Jimmy Day, there was Shot Jackson, and Weldon Myrick. I don't recall who else, but Weldon's back was to me, and when I walked up there, somebody had noticed me, you know, and Weldon turned around, and he looked ashen. I mean, really, and he seriously asked me, he said, "Lloyd, what on earth have you done?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, and he repeated, he said, "What on earth have you done?" I said, "You talking about this record? I just played a solo." He said, "No." He said, "What on earth have you done? This is not what we've been playing." And that was the first response that I ever got from really a major league player. And so that was kind of comforting too, that they recognized it. Obviously, I didn't do it for steel players. I mean, I did it for me, and it launched my career. Anyway, it's kind of a
but that goes into a
story.
Yeah, well, no, that's great, because there's a myth that when you get into the studio, you have a responsibility you know, steel, from a steel player perspective, they think, oh, well, you're going to play something for us, so we got something else to learn, and within the boundaries of what's known. And then if you do something like that record that goes against the grain, and but you're doing it for yourself, and you're doing it for the song in the moment, and
well, it's all those elements, and I don't know which order comes first. Maybe they're all of equal value, and you see the same perspectives I do in the same dimensions of it. So, but those are all, but certainly not only even on the list are steel players. We're not playing for steel players.
Yeah.
Otherwise, our careers would have flamed out real quickly.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's a short-lived career.
It's, as you found out when you got into sessions, it's a rarefied atmosphere, and of all the players that become successful as you have, and as I did, and Buddy Emmons, to some degree, Buddy was going back and forth. He was playing with Roger Miller, really bass during the formative years, I mean the golden era of country music from 1966 or 7 until the mid-70s when he came back in 1973. But he was contributing out there too.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think I know what the way I view it, and so this will be a perspective on that.
Yeah.
When you say about Buddy Emmons, and I love Buddy Emmons, this is nothing
We all
to
do,
do it, but really, truthfully, when you're talking about early, that vintage, to me, that's the best period of country music ever. I mean, for me, it is. And
now, wait a minute, which vintage?
we're talking about the 60s. I'm talking about when this instrument was still in its infancy and it was being explored, like when you came up with we'll talk about in a minute about Raising the East, but it seemed like Nashville and country music embraced the instrument. And Buddy was out in California. Buddy was always, and Buddy would tell you that, he was always, you know, he's exploring other things, and he would get, you know, he'd drift. You know, it might be appealing to him to go play bass with Roger Miller or do something else, and he would. But you and Pete Drake and Weldon and Hal, those were the primary players, and more you so, and Pete probably than the others. And then they all did great work and did a lot of
Absolutely.
it. But to me, that's that period. And then of course, you know, there's great, like The Shoes on the Other Foot. I don't even know who played that record, but that was brilliant. You know, there were records that happened and it wouldn't be the normal guy. So a lot of people contributed, but the main part of it was you, and that was, again, your ability to come up with a style for Warner Mac, then for Paycheck, and then for, you know, Lynn Anderson. And
well, you know, fortunately, I came along at that period of time you're describing, which was the formative period and the infancy of the modern pedals, and it was just a beautiful period of time, and there was so much that had not been explored on this thing, so I didn't have the past to go by. They really wanted newer stuff, but they wanted it still the commercial fashion, melodically and everything. And I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for later players like yourself. Your major career broke in 1988 in a big fashion with the Rodney Crowell Above and Beyond album, I think.
Yeah.
And so there was all this tapestry had been laid before, so it makes it more difficult. Had I come along later like you, I mean, there would have been all this music that had been played. I think, what else is left? But you found other stuff, of course, but there was a lot of information and a lot of the language written during the 60s, and which is the most explosive period, I think, of the steel guitar and country music.
Well, they were embracing the way it came off to me. They were embracing the sound of the instrument, and it was like that's what they wanted on their records. They wanted, hey, give me something great on steel, and of course you couldn't just keep on playing the same, like you said, you and Hal and Weldon wore out that one style. But so you had in a way the job, you know, that you were doing forced you to I've got to bring something new. I got to do this, and it seemed like I visualize it as a great time, because it's like you got all these great minds. It's like a wave of really smart and intelligent players trying to go and let's see who can, you know, it's like playing a
Well, there was a certain competitive
yeah,
edge to it too, yeah.
but it's in a good way. It was like, you know, and I remember, and I've mentioned it already, but like when Divorce came out, and I heard this, and I thought, how in the world? I don't even know what key you did it in, but that
D,
move
D.
right there. A D. Well, I always get it. Now I'm probably
It
not
works
doing
in
it,
any
right?
key, though.
Yeah, but that move, because before that, you know, you had to do that, but it didn't have that high pitch. You know, you could do it everywhere because of the change you put on the guitar.
Well, it always bothered me that I had to do slants with 3 notes to do something like that. And
Yeah.
it was another memory from 1957 that triggered the E to F pedal for me. Buddy Emmons had played a slide intro on Farron Young's Sweet Dreams just the summer of 1956. I started with Farron January 1st, 1957. And that was a summer record, and the first record that Farron had used pedals on. And the intro was in D, and he played. Sweet dream,
Yeah.
but anyway, Buddy did, and it was fairly in tune,
Yeah.
but I can't even play it in tune now myself.
That's really
3 notes.
close.
But that bothered me, you know. I thought, and I just filed that away, because I played that numerous times
Yeah.
with Farron Young, of course, during the year and a half I was with him. And one day I had walked into David Jackson at Showbud. It was sometime late in 1967, and I had a 10 o'clock session that morning. David called me about, I guess, 9 o'clock. He said, "Hey, can you come by? I want to show you something. Pete Drake has come up with a new tuning, a new pedal." Now, so I was obviously by then that part of Showbud was down by Stardate Studio, which was 3 minutes from my house, so it was on the way. And I rushed down there. I was ready to go anyway, and he showed me this pedal that he'd already put on another guitar, but it was really complicated. You had to press the A and B pedal, and then you had a knee lever that. Let's see, and it brought up the 4th string a whole tone, the E string,
Yeah.
and the 5th string another half tone.
Yeah.
But it had a block sound like. And ironically, Pete did use it on "I Don't Want to Play House with Tammy Wynette," which is on the same.
It's
album,
on the same record?
On the same album as DIVORCE with two different pedals. And had I not played DIVORCE, that pedal would have been the dominant pedal.
That could have, yeah.
I mean, until somebody figured out that there's an easier way.
Easier way.
But anyway, it was so complicated, and that knee lever was so hard to press, because you already got the A and B pedal, and then you bring in 2 more strings into the action. And I told David, that's suddenly when I remembered and put it all together of Sweet Dreams. I said, I know how to do that with moving 1 string and 1 pedal. He said, no, you can't do it. It's not possible. I said, yeah, it is. And I showed him. I said, look, if you play, you press the first pedal, the A to B pedal, then you get a minor chord. And I said, if you just raised that 4th string a half tone, I could hear it, you know, but I could hear it up here to the 3rd above the G chord. And I said, if you put that 1 pedal on there, you're going to have that G chord at the 6th fret. And I could already visualize. He said, I don't think it'll work. I said, yeah, it will. Put it on. And he put it on. I mean, it only took him a few minutes to put it on, and it worked. And
That's
so
great.
I said, he said, God, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Then he was confused because he'd been calling everybody, man, you got to hear this new pedal. Pete said he dreamed last night. That's what Pete told him. He dreamed it and came down. And so Pete actually had the idea for that more complex, and he used it on two great records. I Don't Want to Play House with Tammy Wynette, and a Don Gibson record, which was even better, I thought. But it always sounded blocked to me. The pedal had a blocky effect instead of a smooth symmetry and effortless flow. But of course, once DIVRCE came, and the way that came about was I was still experimenting with trying to. I found out real quickly, because the intonation changed as you went up the scale, that on my guitar at least, by the time if I was playing in the high registers up here and used it, it's gonna be flat unless I sharpened the bar. So I was playing at least a third to a half fret in between to make it the pitch. So I was just doing a Billy Sherrill session that day with Tammy, because Pete couldn't do it. Pete was the #1 Billy Sherrill producer call at Columbia for George Jones and Tammy Wynette, Charlie Rich, all the major acts. And I got called if Pete was unavailable, so that he was already booked, I guess, that day. And so I'm doodling around with it, you know. And I was just doing that, and Billy Sherrill came over and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I have never heard that before. What is that?" So he recognized it was something different that he had not heard. And I showed him. He said, "Play a little bit of that," and I did. He said, "Okay, that's going to be our intro." And he hummed me the melody. He said, "Play this note."
So he just gave you
do it your way with that sound. So he gave me the melody, and I played. And Jerry Kennedy, the great guitar player and producer at Mercury Records, was playing tremolo guitar, and they added that on the first part of it.
That's brilliant.
And then it became it was the pedal. And to me, when I found that pedal that day, that little simple change, it just, my whole mental process said, now it's complete.
Yeah.
That's all I need to play. I can play everything I can visualize now with this setup, and that was in late 1967. And the pedal configuration and setup I have is precisely what it was that day.
That's what I was going to lead everybody into, because it's
I'm not trying to change any minds, but I'm just saying for me it was complete.
Well, when going back to Venus Moon, when you played that song, if you close your eyes, you'd think he must have 40 pedals. And
yeah, it does sound a lot more complex.
You know, it's very complex, and that goes to the ultimate point in what you've been able to do is you've found a way to get all the intervals, anything that any kind of voicing or whatever, and you've never needed to. I mean, I heard you say this one time. Well, if I find a pedal that I can't get.
Well, I just must have to have, but I never found another one.
You always found another way to get the things you wanted to play.
Because there were so many guys, ultimately found the lowering the 5th string and the 6th string, half and a whole tone, which is a beautiful change. And I would, I thought about putting it on, but then for my purposes, studio recording, it seemed limited because it becomes one of those pedals that you're just going to overuse if you're not careful. And so I just figured, like, there's another way to do it. You at least get part of it. I could, by going down 2 frets and raising the 3rd pedal, the whole tone, which is the same note as the A note, and then you get like a suspension actually out of the chord. And then I found other ways to use it, and you can add notes in that are part of the structure and make all kind of chord.
You can.
You can too. Tommy White, you can.
Yeah, well, but it's just that I was just listening to how smooth you just did that. know, it's like anytime you play something, it's like the confidence that you have from and that's muscle memory, I'm sure. It's like you know what your pedals are going to do, how it feels, and you know, and so to you, it's just it's the way you sing.
Well, it is, and it has to do with timing. The timing is so key. You know, there's only 12 notes we have to work with, and so how are you going to configure those 12 notes? There's a myriad number of ways, and they've been configured countless millions of times. But then I visualize a note as not being a little note on unwritten paper. I visualize it sometimes like this big, maybe big as a football. And then you dissect that note. You've got, where can you put the emphasis on the beat? You can put it in 100 different places of that one note, and it gives it an entirely different expression or meaning. And that's where individuality comes in. I mean, it's the phrasing and the timing, you know. So doing something as simple as that it's not just doing it. It's like, it's just a smooth.
Yes, it is. All of that.
Yeah, and it's just all. It's just a visualization of a dance.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, it's, to me, it's just such a beautiful way, and it's not as predictable when you start playing around things that you don't have. If you just add a pedal on, and you know, and I have to say, I'm one of those that when I started playing, I added pedals because my father, you know, I know you drop the E, but I have a tuner and I can tune it to return perfect. So I grew up in a different time.
That's right.
Because you've alluded to things like the pedal be so hard. You guys were playing instruments that the mechanics had not evolved to keep up with your minds, the creative minds that were sitting behind the instrument. So, but it's great that you've resisted. And I think it's a beautiful thing that you've resisted just adding pedals, because you could, and I know Buddy did. I mean, as great as Buddy's mind was, he's like me. I mean, he would just, let me check that pedal out. He was always exploring things where you were exploring in it's equal to that, but in a different way. You were going, oh, wait, let me see. I can angle my bar. I can do all these things. And you saw the mathematics, and it's...
Well, I didn't feel like that it was, I felt like everything was there according to how your mind would perceive it. I just knew that there was a lot more. You could take what we had and start stretching it and look at it in these bigger pictures by enlarging the picture, and that virtually there's limitless ideas just on this simple setup. So I can't imagine what would be with what you have, you know. Well, and so much more complexity of pedals. But there is an inherent danger to me in having a lot of pedals, and and you don't do it, of course, and nor does Tommy White. But the danger, one of the inherent dangers is everything becomes mechanical, and it's easy to not move your bar. It's easy to stay in one position, and because you can get all those things moving, and it's a lazy in a form. It can become a lazy habit. Yeah. And the movement of the bar is where the emotion is. I'm left-handed, and I think probably from a right hand, I mean, the creative part of the brain's in the right, and being left-handed, I don't feel the stuff with my right hand. I feel it with my left hand.
It shows.
And you know, it's a disputable discussion about which is. I've heard guys discuss how important the right hand is. Way more important than left is just the bar hand. The bar hand is where the emotion is. I mean, without this, you have no emotion. You can get some emotion by the way you pick the strings, the intensity that you hit them at, but really the emotion comes from the bar movement to me, and making all those pedals work and into this seamless fashion where it becomes a unit, one picture.
Yeah, thank you. You have just confirmed. I've been stressing the bar hand, the importance of that, the volume pedal, the emotion of the instrument. This is the human voice.
So it's there.
Yeah, this is it.
That is the voice.
If it cries, it's coming from here. It's not, you know. And everybody gets caught up on, can I pick these strings and doing the blocking? And I was noticing, I saw you guys play, by the way, and it was just amazing the other night with Sweethearts of the Rodeo release, and you and JD were playing. But I was watching just how efficient your right hand is. But then I was watching your eyes. You're always just, it's like you're attached. You could see. I mean, now you put it in words, but you could see. And you could see in your, you know, we all are physical, but you can see when you're really feeling things. And then you're doing all these things, especially when you get to the second string, because I think that baffles most people when they listen to you. If you're a player that lowers your E's, and it's in the things that you do, it's just. I mean, I can't put it in words, but it's.
Well, it does. It opened a whole new arena of playing for me when I was forced to go to the second string. When I took the fourth string lower off,
Yeah.
I had no idea what was awaiting, but I just knew that what I needed was there for the fundamental, simple stuff. But then I realized there was a whole uncharted territory that existed, and a whole new world of playing that nobody had explored. I was there by myself for so long, and it was a wonderful feeling to be in that.
Well, and you still are in many ways. I know Tommy and I have my own versions of that, but nobody too. I was watching you the other night, and it's like that's your thing, you know. And I watched you do that, and how attached emotionally you are to it.
You've got it precisely right, Paul. I don't mean to interrupt you, except so I don't lose the thought of that.
Yeah.
The all emotion. I feel the bar. I feel all of it coming through here. I mean, some of it, you know, is transferred over to the hand, the right hand, but I feel it all through here, and it seems like it just goes from the brain to the left hand for me. So I don't talk about it much because everybody wants to say, okay, it's all the right hand. But for me, it's always been the left hand.
Yeah.
And I use that for my voice, as you said. It is the voice for me.
Well, I met Jerry Bird one time, but I've certainly watched Admirable Bird record. I love when he tried to emulate the pedals, but when I heard him play, I always thought that he was connected to it's the bar.
I think he was too.
And you know, that stood out to me, and I heard the same thing in your playing, and you know, I did get to talk to John Huey, and he was the same way. That his bar was that, you know, that was what he was focused in on, and it's you know what, and I think that and hopefully this new generation of players, that one of the kids out there is going to realize that what happened to this instrument. It's a really great thing. It's just a little, and you certainly were there, but when pedals came along, we didn't, you know, we had pedals to do what the bar should do, and so. And then as pedals got better, we kind of eliminated the study of the bar. But when I watched you play Venus Moon, and I'm watching I mean, it's like, it's there. You don't forget anything about the way the instrument was played before pedals.
Well, I think it's a union. Yeah, I felt like, particularly, I mean, once I took the E to E flat off, I mean, I was forced into a lot of new thinking, and then I went back to that era of where I didn't use pedals, and I thought, well, this is I can still do this on the second string, and even do that, and even do and so there's all kind of expansions of the E string, not even lowering the E, you know.
Yeah.
That you can't get that kind of sound with just lowering the E, because it brings into a whole new dimension the third string.
Yeah. Well, it brings in this beautiful sound, which I know you had a fond love of Tom Brumley. But when he played together again, it was the sound of that third and the fifth string. Okay, but what you've done is the same thing, only you've taken the E. Like, to me, this isn't as pretty, and I'll just, because it's the gauges of the strings.
Yeah, the gauges make the difference in the tonal quality.
They're so tightly connected, and I switched to a 15, trying to get even that to separate that from the third just a little bit, but with the way you're approaching all those intervals, like the flat, you know, when you do that kind of stuff, it's got the sound. It doesn't have that bright thin
and that's
string.
because the further you can separate those two strings, the more the vibrations have to space to move around in, and it gives an entirely different tonal effect. Not only because of the different gauge, which obviously the second string's a 15 on most of our guitars, versus a 14. I mean, well, 14 on the fourth string. But that's not a lot of difference. But the further you can get away from the more you can separate those notes, the bigger the sound becomes with that vibration, oscillation of those. If you did it wouldn't have the same magic at all, and plus you got that bar. You know, you can have the emotion going into it without making it. Once again, you get into trouble if you try to be too emotional with it. You do it the way it feels, not the way you think it should be. You know. And not having that lower E to E flat, I mean, I've learned how to do all this kind of stuff fluidly too, where it sounds like it's melting into. You don't really hear any changes going on, but you just hear the notes changing, and and it has just that beautiful sound in my ears, and that's why I like to do it.
You did what you just played reminded me of that. You played probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest solos you've ever put on a record. Remember When by Alan Jackson, and there's a little. Do you remember?
Well, yeah, and it gets awkward to talk about Alan Jackson because Paul Franklin is the Alan Jackson player, and that was my singular record. He wanted that one thing. He didn't want anything else from me. So.
Yeah, but did you deliver, man? That's.
Let's see if I can play it. Let's see. And it doesn't. It loses so much in the translation without having music.
Without the orchestra, you need to.
Let's see.
That's brilliant.
I haven't played that in
Oh,
many
I know.
years.
I put you on the spot.
Let's see.
That's great.